Hi, welcome to the first ever podcast of Draft Day Sports College Football's SimNation College Football League. Just wanted to give a couple quick bits of information about us and the game that we're talking about today. SimNation, of course, is a group of um, simulation sports enthusiasts who have come together to play a whole bunch of different types of sports simulators, ranging from draft day sports college football, which is what we're going to talk about today, to draft day sports pro football, to bowl bound college football. We also have some hockey, baseball, and other sports, including a homegrown soccer simulator that was created by one of the members of the community. We're found at simnation.net. And of course, a quick shout out to Wolverine Studios, who is the maker of many of the games that we use within this community. This one, of course, being Draft Day Sports College Football 2021. I would highly encourage you all to check it out. You can go to Wolverine Studios and you'll be able to see all the different games that they offer there. So, kind of dive right into this. SNCFL is a pretty mature league. It's been around probably, I think, since 2017. And for those of you who haven't had any experience with it, we run simulations on 3 times a week: Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And essentially, we have quite a few coaches in the league who choose a team, and then they essentially will take care of that team throughout the course of a season. I think we started in 2016, 2017, and we're on the 2043 season. We tend to go through multiple seasons a season. And of course, all this ties into another league, which is running on Draft Day Sports Pro Football, which is the WWPF, which is another SimNation league, which has a very active coaching base. So all the players in this league will actually be drafted into that league. And the beauty is, over the course of, I think it's in this version where we can actually tie the two leagues together, and the pro league can see the college league, and the college league can see the pro league. Not going to really focus on much of that today. Going to kind of talk about SimNation. We do have quite a few teams open right now. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go to SNCFL.us, and you'll be able to see the open teams under the league owner information. There's some big name teams that are open right now, and I'll kind of discuss it as I go through this. But we are starting our 2043 season. We've just gotten done with National Signing Day, and really now in training camps, and now we're really focused on really what is the last preseason sim, which will be set red shirts, and then of course we'll be into week 1, and it'll go through 16 weeks of a college football season, and then bowls, and then we run a 8-team playoff. So the top 8 teams will be invited to the playoffs, and they will play each other for probably another 3 weeks, and then we'll have the end of the season. We just did move to the 2021 version. Previously, we were on 2020, and then you can go all the way back to 2017. So it'll be an interesting year because all the coaches are learning the new version. There are quite a few changes in it. I'll talk about some of that as we go through this, but should be an exciting season. Probably first talk about the top 25, because I think that's a good starting place. Throughout, I'll kind of talk a little bit about history, some of the coaches, and other things. But in the preseason top 25, and this is different than reality, right? The number 1 team is the Maryland Terrapins. Going into the season, they are, of course, last year's national champion, where they defeated Baylor in the championship game. Maryland is coached by myself. I am a real life Maryland fan, so this is something that I would not expect to see in real life, especially in the football program, which hasn't really seen much success since the beginning of the millennium. But the number 2 team is the Arbor Tigers, which is coached by Matt. Auburn, he's really turned around the Auburn franchise, and of course, if I remember correctly, Matt is an actual Auburn fan. So it means a lot to him to have gotten them turned around. Alabama's number 3. They're coached by Max. Max has done a phenomenal job in turning around Alabama. For the first probably 10, 15 seasons, Alabama was the Powell in the SNCFL when they were coached by Doc Williams. Doc was just a phenomenal coach and player of this game. And then he stepped away, and Alabama kind of fell on hard times before Max took them over, coming over from South Carolina. And he's really turned them around, and we'll talk about them specifically when we get into recruiting because there's a really big story, though. Clemson is number 4, and of course they are, again, coached by Matt, and they are one of the perennial powers. They pretty much own the ACC at this point, not much different than real life. And then, of course, they have won a couple national championships and been in the playoffs pretty much every season since he's had them. Number 5 is Baylor. Baylor is, of course, coached by Skeltor. Skeltor is probably the biggest personality within SNCFL. If you know him, you love him. But he's really phenomenal at coaching. He's won national championships at USC. We'll talk about another of his teams shortly, which is the Louisiana Monroe Warhawks. He is just really good at offense and defense, and his teams are perennially competing. And of course, the year before last year, he won the national championship. But last year, he fell to Maryland, which probably didn't make him happy. Ohio State had a much storied tradition in the beginning. It was led by a coach named Lowell. They're now coached by Rick Sullivan. It's his first season. But I'm pretty sure Ohio State's going to get back in the thick of things and start challenging Maryland for the Big Ten and probably for the national championship. Maybe not this season, but definitely going forward. Number 7 is Miami. Miami is a computer-controlled team. For a long time, they were coached by a coach named Rouse. He did a phenomenal job. Left us a few seasons ago, but Miami's still doing really well. Number 8 is USC, another computer-controlled team. USC was Skelter's original starting point. He won some national championships, though. Got bored of winning too often and decided to go off to a different school. And they've done okay. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They traditionally don't make the playoffs just because they play one of the hardest schedules year in and year out in the SNCFL. And as a result, even though they'll win the Pac-12 most years, they don't have a good enough record to get into the playoffs because there's no automatic ends for leagues. Number 9 is LSU. If I'm not mistaken, this is also Rick's team. LSU at one point was coached by Skeltor, and they had some success, kind of blocked by Doc at Alabama, and then he decided to move on. But this will be Rick's first season with LSU. Mississippi is a former team of mine. They had much success as well. Never could get past Doc, never could get past Skeltor, but they've always been perennially a top 25 team. Oklahoma will be in its first season without me as the coach. I coached them last season. Big year was when I got them to the national championship game, only to lose pretty big. Last year they made the playoffs, but ran into Maryland in the first round and just got knocked out. They probably have the nation's best quarterback, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. Go through a little quicker. Number 12, Central Florida. That's a computer control team again. They pretty much dominate the conference and are perennially challenging for the playoffs, even though they don't traditionally make it very far. Cincinnati is on an uptick. They're improving year over year. If I remember correctly, number 14 is Toasty. This is his first year in the SNCFL. In his first year with Texas A&M, probably expect some good things out of them. They should compete in the SEC. The SEC is just really hard because depending on how you play, you're going to run into Auburn or Alabama at some point, and those are really hard teams to get past. Michigan State's at number 15. That was coached by Gary. Gary decided to move over to Arizona State. Um, Michigan State is probably one of the powers in the Big Ten behind Maryland. Maryland kind of dominates that conference, but Michigan State year in and year out gives them pretty good run for their money. 16 is Virginia. They traditionally will win the Coastal, only to lose the Atlantic to Clemson. 17 is Georgia Tech. Again, same story. It's Virginia and Georgia Tech in the Coastal, typically year after year competing for it and trying to get the rights in order to lose out to Clemson in the end. TCU's CPU controlled as well. They are probably one of the best teams in the Big 12, and they will routinely compete with Oklahoma and with Baylor. They've made it to the playoffs a couple times now, and it's a pretty strong team, even how controlled. They do very well. Iowa is, of course, probably the preeminent power, or was the preeminent power under Rouse, and had a couple good seasons after he left. But Minnesota, who was coached by Skelter, kind of took over that side of the Big Ten. Houston, not again, they're in the race every year. They don't tend to make the playoffs. Number 21 is kind of the intriguing one. This is Louisiana Monroe. They are coached by Skelter. They are probably the preeminent rushing attack. They had a running back named the name of Bynum who ran for over 3,000 yards in two separate seasons. Probably one of the best rushers ever in the SNCFL. And of course, I think this is one. I think there's a personal attachment here with Skelter, so I kind of look for him to continue to do really great things with Louisiana Monroe. Florida is Odell Dillard. This is a new addition. He's also a new coach in our league. I think this is his favorite team as well. So kind of look forward to see what he can do. He's done some good things already in the WWPF, so I think that should translate here. And then the last three teams, Florida State at 23, Missouri at 24, and South Carolina 25. Those are all CPU controlled. And each team does fairly well in the conference, but again, Florida State is out of the Atlantic at the ACC. They're not getting past Clemson. Missouri has a hard time in the SEC with getting past just the different powers in that conference. And then, of course, South Carolina was doing very well when it was Max. He left to go to Alabama. They haven't been as good since. So that's kind of the lay of the land from a top 25. Recruiting wise, we just wrapped that up, and the number one team was Penn State. I want to caveat that with a little bit though, because Penn State, while being really that top team, they were there for probably not the best of reasons. And what I mean by that is a dynamic in this league is if you have a human coach and you forget to turn it back to CPU, it was run as human coach. And as a result, they didn't do any recruiting for about 2 different seasons. And as a result, they ended up with a really bad situation that kind of crippled them. And I'm going to scroll down here just so you can kind of see. So they ended up with 76 recruits, which with a little bit of quirk in the math. If you're talking Rivals, Rivals only does like the top 20 to 25 players, and then that caps it. So if you get a large class, you can't go number one. I think 247 does something like that in real life as well. But in SNCFL, there's no logic for that. So they had 76 3-star recruits. They were number one. Number 2 really is Alabama, and Alabama just last season was phenomenal. Most of the top recruits in the country went to Alabama. Max is really building a dynasty there from a recruiting perspective. Air Force was another one of those where it was on human control, and they had a lot of open holes, and they recruited a lot of people, so they got up there. Arizona State, I don't think that was the case with them. Arizona State had a pretty good year recruiting. They did have a lot of openings, so did Houston, Michigan. Oklahoma wasn't in that boat. Neither was Louisiana Monroe, Baylor, or Auburn. Those teams legitimately just went out and got a lot of 5 stars. Now, what you'll notice is Maryland's not in there. Maryland had a very small class last season, but they literally walked away with quite a few 5 stars. There's something that Gary did that I kind of want to bring up, and Gary is kind of an analytical genius in a way. He's always looking at the different things, and one of his things that he looks at is the 5 star ratio for these teams, and I think that's important to kind of talk about and look at. So let me see if I can't bring that up, because that is one of those things that will, I'll have to find it, but essentially when you look at it, it is one of those scenarios will, I think it was Auburn was like the top team coming out with a lot of different with the most 5 stars, but Alabama really had the most 5 stars, and I'll show you that in a second. And I should have put this up, but I don't know why I didn't. Okay, I'll probably talk about it in the next podcast then, because I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time looking for it. But it was a really good analysis that Gary did, that really put out there just what, here it is, I found it. So when you think about blue chip ratio, in real life, blue chip ratio is like the number of 4 and 5 stars against the number of people you recruit. The best teams have a high blue chip ratio. So if you look at real life, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, those schools, they have a very high blue chip ratio. They literally will pull in most of the blue chips. In the SNCFL, it's not much different. If you look at the teams that are successful in the last 3 or 4 years, it's been Auburn, Alabama, Maryland, Clemson, Baylor, probably Louisiana Monroe, which is always a shock. But if you talk about them, Gary did this analysis, and what he showed is Auburn had the highest blue chip ratio with like 81%. And this is again before red shots. If you're going to really have a shot at title, you probably have to have around 50%. And Gary's done some good analysis around that, which kind of shows that to be true. So maybe if you're around 40%, you have a shot. If you're skilled at Louisiana Monroe, 30% will probably get you there. But Auburn is at the highest with 81%, Alabama 74, Maryland 72. Right, Clemson is 67, Baylor 61. Those right there are traditionally your top 4 teams every year in, year out. From a CPU perspective, Rick has a pretty good chance, again, because he's inheriting Ohio State, who's at 53, Miami's at 51, USC 45, Louisiana Monroe's at 45%, and that's a pretty big stat for a school. And Scuttle really took them at a low point, and he built them into this big power that they are now, to where they compete year in, year out. And then the rest of the ones over 40, because if you're at 40, you probably have a chance at a title. If you're below 40, you may not. Cincinnati, Houston, Louisiana State. So those are the schools that high blue chip, lots of 4s and 5 stars. And these are traditionally the schools that we're starting to see in the WWPF that are pumping out the talent every year with the draft and so forth. So I think if you're at one of those schools, you have a pretty big chance of winning it. Now, I will say coaching does matter in this league, and the new changes in the 2021 version is going to make life interesting for everyone. In the old days, what you could do is just choose 10 plays. It's kind of like Remember the Titans, right? I run the same play over and over again, and your goal is to try to stop me. And that's how Maryland and Baylor have been playing, is they are rush-heavy teams who will sweep right, sweep left, off tackle right, off tackle left. Good luck stopping us, because we're just going to plow through you. And they do it with much success, and I'll show you that in a moment. Versus now, you can't really do that. So now you really have to focus more on a little bit of focusing around balancing your playbook. You really need to have a playbook that has probably at least 20 plays in it. So you got to have 10 pass, 10 run. I would say you probably need a little bit more on defense. You can't get away with the 3-3-5 or the 4-2-5 or the nickel defense. Just running the same play over and over again and being able to stop everything. You really have to have 10 plays, ideally 20. Um, so for this season, it's going to open it up. It means that the traditional powerhouses are still going to have to be very, very important. And for the people who play in the WWPF, they kind of learned this last deal with Draft Day Sports Pro Football because you started to see this dynamic. Now, there's some quirks in that I hope don't show up in the college game. One of them being is the abnormal fumble rate. But, there's a reality of how to fix that. You got to focus on hands. So I'll probably do a podcast just focusing on that in the future. But it's going to be an interesting season. It's probably going to be the most wide open that I think that we have ever seen in the SNCFL. Will the top teams may struggle a little bit. Now, I want to be careful with that, right? Because I don't think the Marylands, I don't think the Baylors are going to struggle too much. And the reason for it is because they have such a talent differential over everyone else. Auburn's not going to struggle. Alabama's not going to struggle. Clemson's not going to struggle because the talent is just so different with those teams than everyone else. But kind of if we look at the standings and kind of the state of things, you kind of, when you look at the Atlantic coast, and we'll look at that here real quick, is you have 5 teams that are ranked in the top 25. That first week game of Clemson and Louisiana State's going to be a really big one. So that's Rick versus Matt. Of course, Clemson is a 4.5 point favorite. North Carolina at Maryland. It's a line of 6. North Carolina's not going to hang with Maryland. Maryland just is probably going to blow them out of the water. The other game to watch in this week, and maybe 3 games to watch in this week, is going to be UNLV at Miami. UNLV is coached by Bandit. Bandit is just one of the premier offensive minds in the league. He's going to pass or he's going to run, whichever one he decides he's doing, he's going to do it well. Miami is a strong team. I won't be shocked if you see UNLV upset Miami. The Georgia State at North Carolina State, again, I don't expect that one to be close. That's also Van's team in NC State. I expect him to come out pretty strong, and we'll see how the season plays out for him. Virginia at Washington State. Washington State is one of my 3 teams. I don't expect Washington State to beat Virginia. Washington State's pretty horrific. And I'll preview the human teams here in a moment. And then really when you think about it is I really do think that if you look at this, the wild card here is going to be Van at NC State in the Atlantic, but there's no reason to think that Matt isn't just going to plow through the Atlantic and win that. Over on the Coastal, I think Georgia Tech's going to win the Coastal, just to be honest. I think Miami's strong, but Miami's got a hard schedule. So injuries are going to come into play. They haven't recruited as well durability-wise as I think that they should. And as a result of that, I think what you're going to see is Georgia Tech wins that. And then, of course, Georgia Tech will go against Clemson, and Matt's just going to blow Georgia Tech out. And so I expect to see Clemson at the end of the season somewhere around 4 or 5. They could be as high as 2. They could be a 1 if Maryland loses a game. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the ACC champion's going to be Clemson. When we go over to the American Athletic, again, this is kind of what I was referring to. You have 3 teams here. The team that's really going to win the East is going to be Central Florida. Cincinnati challenges, but I don't see them getting past Central Florida. Central Florida's just got a very good aerial attack. They're very strong at throwing the ball. Houston is a wild card. I do expect them to win the West, and I think that they could upset Central Florida. But I'm going to go with Central Florida. That's a safe bet. When you look at the first week, the Central Florida State game will give us a lot of preview of what's going to go on with Central Florida Golden Knights this year. Cincinnati has an easy gimme game against Miami of Ohio. Houston against Ball State. So really, at the end of the season, I do expect Central Florida to kind of be the team that's still. Big 12, a lot of shakeup in the Big 12. Of course, I love Oklahoma, and traditionally it was me and Skelter, him at Baylor, me at Oklahoma, fighting for who was going to win, with Texas Christian just picking one of us off every season. So what I expect here is we do have some new coaches in this area. Texas has a new coach. I think it's James. He should make this interesting and compete. Texas has a decent squad, but I think the Big 12 starts and stops with Baylor. Baylor is just a very strong rushing attack, and they're going to be hard to beat. So I think it's interesting because I think Baylor actually has the best running back, and I think that Oklahoma actually has the best quarterback. And I'll talk about them in a little bit. But if I had to guess, this will probably have two teams in the playoffs. They do most seasons. And I think it'll be Baylor and Texas Christian. With Baylor, of course, going. And, of course, you have that week 1 matchup, which is number 10 Mississippi against number 5 Baylor. It's not going to be a 4.5-point spread. If I were to bet that, I would bet 14 to 21. They're just going to blow them out of water. Toasty will get his first chance, and we'll start to see what he's capable of doing in this league as they travel to Iowa State. And then, of course, Texas will open with Florida Atlantic. They should win that one relatively easily. So it'll be interesting to see what James and Toasty can bring to the table, see if they can cause Skelter some stress at Baylor. The Big Ten, of course, things start and stop with Maryland. Maryland over the last probably 5-6 seasons is the powerhouse in the SNCFL. I do think, given Rick's pedigree with bowl-bound college football, I think that he's going to compete sooner rather than later. Ohio State's coming in with a pretty good class, so I do expect to see him compete. Michigan State should backslide a little bit without Gary. If I remember correctly, at Penn State is Don. Don has a lot of work to do this year. Again, back to that Penn State situation where they have 76 three-star freshmen coming in who are going to start this year. Most of his starting lineup will be freshmen. I do expect him to get them righted pretty quickly. Before he left, Penn State was really competing. And then the team to kind of watch out for is Rutgers. They trip everyone. They get someone every year. Out in the West, Skelter's no longer at Minnesota, so I don't expect Minnesota to have a high bar. They could compete this season, but I think Iowa's going to win the West. And then, of course, Iowa will likely face Maryland. I do think that there's a strong chance you're going to see Maryland and Ohio State make the playoffs. Ohio State as an at-large bid, and then, of course, Maryland as the champion of the Big Ten. It's going to be hard to unseat them, just, again, because of that rushing attack, even though I do think I'm going to try to throw the ball this year. Conference USA it's really Louisiana Tech and a combination of Western Kentucky, Marshall. There are a couple human coaches in this. I moved from Texas State to Texas San Antonio. I'm not competing for the championship this year. Maybe even not next year. UTSA is the worst prestige team in the league. They aren't the worst. The worst team in the league probably goes Old Dominion, who is now coached by Skelter, who left Minnesota to go to Old Dominion. And this will be interesting because it could end up with him and I competing against each other for championships down the road. Also thrown in here is James Madison. I decided to add them. That's Soa Dillo again. It'll be his first season. It will be interesting to see what he does with the Dukes, and it'll be a good natural contention because James Madison, of course, is up in Harrisonburg in Virginia. Old Dominion is in Tidewater. And that should be a pretty good rivalry between those two. We'll see what happens. I did have Old Dominion when the league first started, and I dropped them because it was just hard trying to recruit the same region as Maryland was. But if I had to guess, I think Old Dominion will sneak up into this contention this season, just based on Skelter's ability to coach. I think Louisiana Tech wins the West. It'll be James Madison, Old Dominion, Western Kentucky, and Marshall all fighting it out for the East. And I think in the end, I think Old Dominion will take it. And then I won't be shocked to see Skelter actually win the Conference USA this season. We'll have to watch that. He may have just be getting mad at me because I just jinxed him. For the first week, this game will tell us a lot about Skelter and Old Dominion. They get Texas Christian. That one is interesting because the game is saying Old Dominion's going to win it by a point. I don't know many times Old Dominion would be favored over Texas Christian in real life, but again, Skelter's a phenomenal coach, so I could see that happening. Independence, if I remember correctly, JC is at Notre Dame. It should be interesting. They had a good season last year. I don't think he'll compete for a playoff spot this year, but he's got him on an upward trend, and I do think that give it a few more seasons and he'll be competing for that. And then, of course, Massachusetts is one of the worst teams in the league, so it'll be interesting to see if they keep that up. Not much to see in Mid-American, and I'm probably going to gloss through them. There aren't any really human coaches in the Mid-American or the MAC. Toledo kind of dominates this. Northern Illinois, though, I think last year actually won the conference, so expect to see Toledo and Northern Illinois go at it. Bowling Green and Akron are the other two teams to watch. I do think that Bowling Green will win the East, and then I'm going to go ahead and say Northern Illinois wins the West, and then Northern Illinois wins the conference, which will get them into a good bowl because they're not going to go into the playoffs. The MAC doesn't have that history. But we'll get a good idea to see what Soa can do because he's got the best MAC team in week one with his James Madison Dukes, and currently Northern Illinois is a 4-point favorite. Out in the Mountain West, this one will get interesting. UNLV had a down season last year again because I forgot to change them over to CPU, and kind of Bandit got to live that experience, and apologize Bandit ahead of time. I do believe Gary is still at Boise State. I could be wrong about that one. But I expect to see Boise State compete. Colorado State will challenge them. Utah State will be in that mix. In the West, Fresno State and Nevada will be the two to watch, in addition to UNLV. But it'll be interesting to see what Bandit comes out with. Is he going to run the ball or is he going to throw the ball? If he throws the ball, he's got phenomenal quartet of quarterbacks to choose from, and I do expect him to do that. Gary may very well challenge with Boise State. I'm going to go ahead and say it's Boise State, UNLV in the finals, and UNLV takes the conference and likely gets the playoff spot, because I do think it's possible that Bandit could go undefeated. In the Pac-12, there's a lot of change here as well. A lot of coaches moved into the conference. You have JC at Washington. He had a really phenomenal season last year. I think he ended up losing out to Oregon. And then you have Washington State is one of my teams. Don't expect much there. USC does a great job every season of winning the conference or competing for it. But because they have anywhere from 3 to 4 losses, they never make the playoffs. And then, of course, you have Arizona State, which is Gary. He should compete almost right off the bat. Colorado would have been Jeff, but he's running the AAF, which is they take probably the next set of people from the SNCFL that are undrafted by WWPF. And it's an interesting league concept. Essentially those people may kind of think about the World League of Football, right? Well, it's the next set of people who aren't good enough to play in the pros, but they're in the semi-pros or pros, and then they can be drafted out of by WWPF. I think USC wins the South. Um, I think they'll win it pretty easily. Gary will probably compete. And then I think it's really going to be between Washington, Oregon, and Stanford. I'm going to go ahead and say I think Stanford wins it this year. Um, and then Stanford, USC. USC will win it. But again, they won't make the playoffs because they'll have too many losses. Because as you can see, is first week they play Alabama. I think second week they play Maryland. They're gonna already probably be 0-2 before the season starts. Uh, and that's gonna make it interesting. Of course, UTSA gets Washington in week one. JC just try to be nice to me. But we'll see how that goes. They'll give us a good indication of both teams. Southeastern, again, this is where just it's a log jam in the West. You have Auburn, Alabama, Louisiana State, Mississippi, all in the top 10. And then you throw in Texas A&M on top of that with Toasty. And I know I mentioned him in the Big 12. That was just, I'm so used to seeing them in the Big 12. But this one's going to be a free-for-all. And I won't, this is one of those conferences where you could lose 2 games and still make the playoffs, especially if you're in the West. I kind of think it's going to be between Max and Matt, with the potential for Rick and Toasty to be opportunistic and kind of steal it. Matt got Max twice last year. I want to say that Max gets him this year, but both Auburn and Alabama will be in the playoffs. That I'm pretty sure of that. So Alabama will make it out of the West. They'll be my pick. I think SOA will win with Florida in the East. Missouri and South Carolina will make it difficult for him. But I think he gets out, and then he's going to meet up with Alabama, and it'll be a real-life matchup where Alabama will probably win that one fairly easily. If you look at week one, Auburn, Florida have relatively easy games. Alabama has that game against USC, Clemson, in Louisiana State, and then Baylor and Mississippi. So we'll get a pretty good idea of what teams' medal is. But again, at least 2, maybe 3 teams will make it out, and I won't be shocked if into the playoffs, but won't be shocked if all 3 teams come out of the West. And then the Sun Belt for a while had quite a few human coaches in it. It was kind of our test league. So I was at Texas State. Bandit was at Idaho, and then I think Gary, he may still be at Appalachian State. I'm not sure about that, but really, this one's going to come down to Louisiana Monroe and Louisiana Lafayette. Texas State used to act as a spoiler, but it'll be down between the rushing attack of Louisiana Monroe against the balanced attack of Louisiana Lafayette, so Skelter versus Max. I think this year the championship game will be Louisiana Monroe, Louisiana Lafayette. Monroe will win it, get the playoff spot, and kind of go into that. But we'll get a good idea in week one how that's going to look. If we kind of look at just in general, who are some of the players, right? And this is one of those things where, if we look at the top players in the country, I mentioned Oklahoma has the best passer. I think Eugene Wade probably is the best passer in the league right now. But what you need to look out for is Bo Cooney out of UNLV. He's got a high pedigree. He's already thrown for over 12,000 yards, almost 13,000 actually, versus Eugene Wade, who's thrown for 10,000. They both have thrown a lot of touchdowns. But when you look at this, what you quickly notice is if something happens to Bo Cooney, you have William Lyra, who is kind of the backup there. Alabama is kind of along those lines. Dave Eddy's a high 5-star out of Maryland. He doesn't really get to throw the ball. His job is to hand it off to one of the running backs. But if you notice, he's thrown 275 passes in his 3-year career already, but he's already thrown for 50 touchdowns. That's a pretty big number right there. And then, of course, if you look at it, there are a couple other people to watch. There's another UNLV quarterback, like I mentioned, but one of the other people I'd keep an eye on is Cincinnati's Dustin Grisada. He's had a pretty good career so far. And then, of course, Memphis is coached by Cecil. I forgot to mention them earlier. They are an upward tick, and I think they'll continue that. And keep an eye at eye on Jamie Napier. When we talk about running backs, and I'm not going to go through every position, but I think running backs is another place. I mentioned this. Kerry Blunt is probably the best running back in the SNCFL this season. He's out of Baylor. I fully expect him to have a great season. Of course, his backup is pretty phenomenal too, and John Libby. Again, Skelter will get 2 or 3 running backs who will run over 1,500 yards, if not 2,000. And by the way, he doesn't run a wishbone. It's just a straight up I formation where he's rotating people in and out. Central Florida has a very good back as well, but Clemson with Matt, his backs also are up there every year in the top 5. And then another back to kind of look out for will be Lindsay Hoy out of Maryland. I don't actually think he's the best back at Maryland, but he had a pretty phenomenal year last year. But need to take that with a grain of salt. Most of his yards came against Penn State, where Maryland beat them by over 100 points. Again, because they had the issue that happened. But notice Clemson again with Billy Andrade. And then Santiago Worthy and Steve Wilkinson are the 2 backs I'd watch for out of Maryland. Last season, of course, Santiago Worthy was the Heisman. I'm sorry, no, he wasn't. He was the Doug Walker Award winner. And that was his first year playing, by the way. So he had a phenomenal season. Steve Wilkinson is someone who finally got a chance to play. And the problem at Maryland is they have such depth that it's hard to get any playing time there. At guard, I will say that Maryland and Auburn and Alabama probably have the best ones. I don't know that I agree that Joseph Ralph is going to be the best one there, but he could be. If I was going to keep an eye on somebody for a draft, I'd probably say keep an eye on Daryl McDonald out of Mississippi. But any of the Alabama or Auburn linemen are probably going to do very well as well. At tackle, again, you'll notice a lot of Maryland and Alabama Hill. Fletcher is a very good tackle, so is Chase Park. And Frank Daly out of Central Florida. But the person I keep an eye on, again, he's not at a big score, is Clifton Clant out of Louisiana Tech. At center, again, you're going to see probably, to me, Harold Love probably is the best of them. But again, you'll see a lot of Maryland, Alabama again. They have a lot of linemen. At wide receiver, this one will be interesting. I think UNLV will be up there. If you notice, some of these numbers they're just talent. It's not translated to performance. I'd keep an eye on Wisconsin. They do throw the ball. I'd also keep an eye on Central Florida. They're capable of throwing the ball. Baylor's not going to throw it very often. Then you got Utah, but the one program I'd look out for is UNLV. I don't think any of the wide receivers are listed, but those someone I'd keep an eye on. At cornerback, the thing will be Baylor and Miami. If you notice, Miami has 2 of the top 5, and then Baylor has really 3 of the top 10. With Maryland, Gary Blake is someone I'd watch, but other than that, I think keep an eye on Antonio Edwards. And then from TCU, keep an eye on Derek Creighton. I think those are going to be the big ones. Now, there are some people who aren't showing up. I forget his name, from Louisiana Monroe. He just got moved over. Skelter was very good at every year converting a wide receiver, running back, sometimes even a quarterback, into a cornerback and having these lights out corners. So, and because we allow that in the league, it creates a dynamic. At linebacker, again, Kurt Rowan out of Alabama is someone to keep an eye on. I mentioned Carlos Donley. Louisiana Lafayette most years has a very strong defense. And then I'll talk about defensive end because I think this probably more is Peter McMahon is someone to keep an eye on. Same with Edson Bethay. He's a walk-on if I remember correctly. And then Andre Parker out of UNLV. Again, I think you'll see Baylor, Louisiana Monroe, UNLV, Alabama, Auburn are going to have very strong seasons, but I'll keep an eye on Penn State as well. So that's kind of the state of the league going into what will likely be the final preseason sim on Tuesday. We do sim Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. If you're interested, drop me a note here or drop me a note at SimNation.net. Either of the two will help you get in contact with me. We do have a Slack. I'll put it out here on the Twitch and on YouTube, where if you want to join our community, feel free to. But there's a lot of different ways to contact us, and it is a very fun league. And of course, a lot of these coaches do also at the same time join the WWPF because of the feeder between the two. I also kind of do a shout out for the AAF, which is another one of the SimNation leagues, which is a pro football league. It's kind of, like I mentioned, the World League of Football. Against the WWPF, which is kind of like the NFL. But if you have an interest, let us know. We are looking at in the long term of having a high school oriented football league, which will be to allow the high school to feed up into the college feed up into the pros and so forth. And of course, coming in April, SimNation will have a college baseball league to go with its college soccer, college football. We will be starting a college basketball league. The college basketball will be Draft Day Sports College Basketball, again from Wolverine Studios, and then OO out of the park will be the baseball, so it'll be OOTP, and then ultimately down the road sometime in the summer will likely be a college hockey league, which will be Franchise Hockey Manager, again from OOTP. So it's a very vibrant community. If you want to join, just go to simnation.net or let us know through either the Slack that I post here or any of the other different things. You can reach me here as well. But the idea is we will do a podcast every week, kind of let you know where we are. Ultimately, there will be other SimNation leagues that will have podcasts as well. WWPF will have one where they talk about what's going on in the WWPF for that week, and then we'll do one for Bowl Bound College Football, which is a Grey Dog Software Studio production or game where we have two leagues. We have the GDCFL and the WWCF, which both run off that platform, and those are the two more established of the leagues. They've been around for quite some time. But that's it for now, and hopefully we hope to see you soon. Thanks.